Hello and welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp, and I'm the Chief Digital Officer of Dataversity. We would like to thank you for joining this Dataversity webinar, Stop the Madness, a practical guide to making your data catalog strategy work, sponsored today by Metric Insights. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. For questions, we will be collecting them via the Q&A, or if you like to tweet, we encourage you to share highlights or questions via Twitter using hashtag Dataversity. And if you'd like to chat with us or with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. And just to note, the Zoom chat defaults to send to just the panelists, but you may absolutely change it to network with everyone. And to find the Q&A or the chat panels, you may click those icons in the bottom middle of your screen for those features. And as always, we will send a follow-up email within 2 business days containing links to the slides, the recording of the session, and any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now, let me introduce to you our speakers for today, Mike Smidman and Marius Moscovici. Mike is the VP of Sales and Marketing at Metric Insights and has over 15 years of product and marketing experience in the business intelligence industry. He helped bring analytic products to market with senior roles at Seagate Software, AIM Technology, T-Leaf, Xera, and Good Data. Marius has over 20 years of experience in analytics and data warehousing. Marius is the CEO of Metric Insights, the leading provider of a BI portal that helps organizations organize their BI environments and ensure users are getting the actionable data they need. And with that, I will give the floor to Marius and Mike to get today's webinar started. Hello and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us, and we're very excited to be here. Wanted to talk today about governance, and I think the title is about stopping the madness, because we just see sort of the same kind of error repeating itself over and over. I just can't tell you how many customers and other partners we've talked to who just describe a lot of the challenges that they're having around in deploying governance tools effectively. They're either just geez, we're just getting started and really having a hard time figuring out how to take advantage of the data governance tools we have, or we purchased this tool and we've had it in place for years, and it's not really getting a lot of traction within the organization. And so what's going on there? And so we're going to talk today about that and hopefully give you some really very specific, tangible, practical advice as to how to make sure that you are getting the most out of your data governance tools, and you're leveraging and getting success out of that, so that you're not part of that 80% of data governance initiatives that fail according to Gartner, because that's not where you want to be. So we're going to talk about why people do data governance. What are the drivers? What are the things that usually initiate these projects? How people are typically trying to solve governance problems, and then what is the why some of the approach around data governance today doesn't really work. Where is it that it fails, and it fails repeatedly? And then we're going to talk about how you can leverage really a BI portal as sort of the missing piece in this whole puzzle to really fit everything together and make it work. So first, what is it? How does this all happen, right? So the governance initiatives typically get initiated because people feel pain, right? And the pain comes from lack of governance, of course, right? So what are the kinds of things that people see that drive governance initiatives? Well, of course, it's compliance. I've got to make sure GDPR regulations are adhered to. I've got maybe other regulatory requirements that are there around making sure that I know where my PII data is. I'm handling all the data in a responsible way. All those things sort of drive initially, and probably from maybe the primary drivers for starting up governance initiatives. But there's a lot more beyond compliance. Or people want to enable data discoverability. The idea of saying, well, what use is it if I have all this amazing data and all these tables and all these sources? If some new analyst comes on board and they're not aware of the fact that the data is present in this particular data warehouse that can serve them and can answer a particular question, well, then it's no use to them. And if you're only able to see the things that you're given access to, then there's a lot of limitations on how you can work if you can't discover and request access to things. Consistency is very important. So obviously want to make sure that your data is clean, and that it's same definitions apply across the board. So if you're measuring sales, it's being measured the same way, irrespective of which of a set of tables that you're connecting to. Lineage. People want to be able to understand, hey, where does this data come from? Is this originally coming from this sales number originally coming from our Salesforce system? Is it coming from the data warehouse? What are the different hops that it's gone through to get here? All those things color the way that you interact with the information. And so as an analyst, and often even as a business user, the lineage of the data that you're working with is critically important to make sure that you're using the information correctly. And then quality. Right, so you want to have a grasp on data quality, be able to know when it's not there, right? So when there's a problem with the data, be able to identify it, but also be able to know areas where there have been known data quality issues and things that people are resolving and working on. So having identifying that and then generating transparency around data quality is a key aspect of folks that are working with initiating data governance projects. And so what happens? Well, typically somebody looks around and says, well, what are the technologies out there that can help me with this suite of problems that we just talked about? And the answer comes back, aha, it's the data catalog, right? There are all these technologies, whether it's Purview or Alation or Calibra or Google's data catalog or whatever, you choose some piece of technology that you say, well, handles a lot of these kinds of features, has features that support those requirements, and that I'm going to be able to use this technology to solve the problem, right? And what happens after that? Well, you deploy the catalog in your environment. Then next, you bring in all your metadata. So you crawl all of the different data sources you might have. Maybe there are things out in your cloud, some of your data warehouse files, your Hadoop cluster, whatever you have. It kind of goes out there and crawls everything, your BI tools, and sucks in all the metadata associated with everything you have. And then you go in and, of course, set feature capabilities to say, I want to auto tag sensitive data. So now where's the PII data? Where is it that we have names and social security numbers and emails in the data? Make sure you've got a good inventory of that and control over that. These tools will generate lineage for you, so you'll be able to figure out maybe if you're crawling the scripts, ETL scripts, or even using something like Informatica. It might be able to tell you, where is this data coming from? What are the transformation rules that are being used to populate it into the target from the source? It might even be able to tell you all the way to the BI tool, where you can look and see, I have this Power BI dashboard, and I can see that this data is coming from a particular data set that is being sourced from my SQL Server environment, and here's how it all gets rolled up into this solution that I'm looking at. And then once you've got all this automatically collected data, oftentimes is an initiative to create a glossary within these systems. So to say, well, let's make sure that we define these key terms like sales and customer and all the things that I'm interested in measuring, can find those enterprise KPIs in a way that is consistent, so that now I can say I'm going to get buy-in from the business. This is how we're going to define these things. This is how we're going to measure them everywhere that we use them. So that's often part of this initiative as well. So, and then finally, ownership, right? So you want to be able to say, well, here's the particular business user that's responsible for this glossary term, that's responsible for, here's the technical users who are responsible for these particular Tableau dashboards or these data sets that you've onboarded into these data catalogs. They're the ones that build the rules, they're the ones that are maintaining it. They're the ones that you need to go to if you either want to request access to it because you don't have it, or you have a question about how to use the information. So all of that information all gets encapsulated, loaded either on an automated fashion or manually into your data catalog. And once you're done with that, you maybe flag some data quality issues to identify to people where are the issues where they should be aware of problems, and then you launch. So what happens after that? Well, you announce to the whole organization, here's this cool data, we have this new data cataloging tool. You can get all this information about business terms and lineage and data, and you can discover data, you can request access data, it's all there for you. Go at it, right? And what you'll typically find is that, well, initially there's quite a bit of interest in this, and that everyone's very curious. What is this thing? What do I find? What can I find in it? You get a spike in adoption where lots of folks are logging on, but then surely as the sun rises, it sets as well. And unfortunately, it will very quickly, and then we see this over and over again, usage of these technologies just drops off precipitously. So, 3 months, 6 months after the launch, if you look back and you say, well, who's using this? No business users are using it. And then out of the entire analyst community, you're lucky if you got maybe 10% of them are actually engaged with it, right? And the rest of them are not going back to it. They're just not getting the value out of it. And this is where really the big disappointment comes, and where people really scratch their head and they're not really sure what to do next, right? And so, to address this, I think the first step is to really understand, like, what's wrong with that approach? Why does that not work? Why can't we just bring in this is really valuable metadata, add these valuable glossary terms in place, assign ownership, organize all this stuff, launch it, and have it be something that people are really engaged with in a sustained way, so it's generating ongoing value. So looking at that, there are a couple of reasons, or three primary reasons I would maintain why this is sort of doomed to failure, why it's madness to assume that this kind of approach would work. First of all, these tools, really it's true about all of them, they're complex and fairly difficult to use, right? They're really powerful technologies. So data catalog, it can do all these things. It can, mine all of your tables and identify PI data and do these associations and bring in information and link things to BI tools. They're incredibly powerful, but they're also very, very complex. They have to support different kinds of workflows, all kinds of different user requirements. Every organization is a bit different. And so they're not something that you can just sort of log into without any understanding of what that technology is on a casual basis, like once in a month, and use and come back to very easily. There's a learning curve involved, and that learning curve is a very significant barrier. The second big obstacle to making this successful is that inherently there's a huge amount of clutter in these environments, right? When you think about it, you have a data catalog tool. Its whole purpose is to go out and crawl and bring in the metadata for everything that is in your environment. Well, the good news is you have everything in your environment, and the bad news is you have everything in your environment, right? You're not, like, if you've got not only the really high value fact tables in your data warehouse that have been meticulously created, carefully, maintained through data quality scripts and validation and so forth, but you also have the table that it was created 3 years ago by an analyst that's no longer there, that's a duplicate of another table that's not being maintained. That's being brought in as well. And in most organizations of any size, there are so many of those objects that are really not high value objects that the clutter is insurmountable, right? If you do a search inside your data catalogs, you get something useful, but you also get just a ton of junk, right? So that's a huge barrier to adoption. And then finally, and in many ways, maybe even most importantly, if you think about it, the data catalog tool is really not part of anyone's user flow. Maybe apart from like the governance team or the folks that are, maintaining that technology. It's certainly not a part of the business users flow, right? What are the business users doing? They're going into either a dashboard to find information, or maybe they're looking at spreadsheets on SharePoint. They're going to all the places where their information resides and looking at that information. They're not thinking, oh, let me go to the catalog to see what the glossary definition term is for sales, right? That's disconnected from their experience. But also your analysts, they have a flow that's completely divorced from these tools as well, because they're inside of the BI tools. They're in Power BI, they're in Tableau, they're in Qlik, they're building out, or maybe they're in Excel building out a model, right? They're building things out for consumption by the business users. And very seldom, why would they think to go to a data catalog, right? Unless they're specifically have a very compelling reason to just continue doing what they're doing. And so it's just a natural progression that as you roll these tools out, unless there's a way to reach them with that information, the information will not get to them. They just won't go there. So what do you do about that? And clearly, these are just sort of fundamental, behavioral challenges. And so it's not, you can't make the data catalog tool really simple because it's not, right? And nor can you change the workflows when people work. And the all of that information has to be crawled and has to be presented. So we maintain, what I would say that sort of the practical approach here is to really take another step, is to recognize that implementing the data catalog is a first and necessary step to really get your governance in order, but it's not sufficient to solve the entire problem. In that, in order to solve the entire problem, you have to take that metadata that you've collected in the catalog, not all of it, but the good stuff, and you want to make sure we deliver it to the point of consumption. That is, to the place where the analyst and the business user are interacting with your data assets every day, right? So that means, and when we talk about metadata here, we're not just talking about just, I should clarify, I'm talking about a more nuanced view of things. So clearly, for example, the metadata that you have from governance perspective, some of it's in the data catalog, some of it's other things that data catalog is crawled, but not all of it, because there may be BI tools that contain some of the data, metadata, that haven't been integrated in the catalog. Typically, a data catalog might work with Power BI or with Tableau, but not with both. Or maybe it works with both, but not with Qlik. So you have there's going to be some metadata that's going to be present in the BI tools that's not in the catalog, and you need to present that to users. You also have metadata oftentimes that's in Excel. So there's a whole class of reporting assets, sort of user-generated reports, which are not being created in a BI tool. They're probably not in your data catalog at all, but these also have metadata that has to be captured. And oftentimes is metadata that the business itself is maintaining, tagging, glossary term definitions, things of that nature that maybe they haven't, they're not using the data catalog every day, they don't want to, but it's easy enough for them to maintain it in Excel. So you've got to have a solution that brings that metadata in, knits it together with a data catalog and BI tool, and then brings it in at the point of consumption. And then finally, when you onboard your content, the natural process of saying, I'm going to have a governed space, and I'm going to bring in all my different BI assets, I'm going to bring it into this governed environment. That process as well oftentimes has an opportunity to collect metadata. Maybe adding a description when one was not very clearly defined, or maybe making some associations to glossary terms or tags, or adding custom information. Things that help with data literacy, that help people round out the metadata that's already there. There has to be a process by which you can collect and absorb that into the whole ecosystem that you're presenting to users at the point of consumption. And a key principle, absolutely pivotal principle to think about as you think about surfacing metadata, and as even this applies to content itself, right, is that there's really this iceberg phenomena that happens with our information assets, whether they be data sets inside of a data warehouse, or they be BI tool, dashboard reports, things of that nature. And that is that, if you think of that iceberg, there's that classic, 90% of the iceberg is below the water, right? And you see the top 10%. So you want the same thing here. You want to take the top small percentage of content that's really useful and make sure that that is the thing that's above the waterline. That's the stuff that's discoverable to users. Right? And these are the things that are vetted, that has quality, they're not duplicative, etc. Whether it's the data or the BI assets, applies in both cases. And then the rest of it, the massive amount of stuff that's there, but it's really not very useful, keep below the water, keep it out of view, because then users can have an appreciation of what's there, and they can really understand how to engage with information, and you're not overwhelming them with clutter as they're trying to find, that piece of useful information, that data set that I'm going to use to build my analysis, or that dashboard report that I'm going to, use to be able to understand what's going on in my business, right? I want to make sure that the things, all the clutter, the stuff that's redundant, the things that are obsolete, they're just hidden from me. So this is a key principle to keep in mind. And then also very important, you want to think about this whole journey and the way that you're going to support people from a governance perspective. as in a way where you're not just sort of a one size fits all approach, right? Because the governance needs and the consumption needs for somebody who's a business user, they're looking for something completely different from the content publisher, a person who's creating Tableau and Power BI dashboards or pushing spreadsheets out used broadly within the organization. Those experiences are very different and their needs are very different from the data governance professional, the person who's charged with, hey, we got to be in compliance and we got to make sure these governance initiatives are really generating the value that we expect them to. And so your solution that you come up with needs to be carefully targeted towards what the persona that we're working, right? And so let's do a kind of a deeper dive into that. What do we mean by that? And then what we'll look to do is to give you some actual examples. We don't want this presentation to just be about the theoretical. We want to give you some examples of kind of how does this play out in reality. If you create a governed environment that brings all of your governance metadata to the user at the point of consumption, what are they getting from it? Right? So from a business user perspective, what do they want? If you think about that persona. Well, as a business user, I want to find everything in a single place, right? The definition of good governance is that there is a single pane of glass through which I consume all my content, and there's a filter applied so that junk is not there, right? And that's what I care about as a business user. I want to be able to know I'm looking at this, I can trust whatever I find. I'm not going to be stumbling into something that after I do my analysis, someone will tell me, oh, that's obsolete. There's a completely new dashboard that you're supposed to be using for that. That's not going to happen. I also want to be able to find content from anywhere, right? So I should be able to be on my in my desktop on the portal. I can do it in Slack or Microsoft Teams. I can do it on mobile. So kind of having access to the information that I want to be able to consume from anywhere, from any surface, is going to be very important to me. And then it's very important to be able to identify, find, and request access to discoverable content. So security is obviously of paramount importance, right? You're going to have an access model in place that controls who has access to what content. But unless it's an HR report or some very sensitive piece of information that you want to hide the existence of that asset from everyone, unless you have that, more often than not, you want to make sure people know that there is a report that exists with this particular title, with this description, with this general metadata, even if they don't have access to it. There's lots of assets that fall into this category because for two reasons. One, as a business user, you want people to know, oh, okay, this exists. Let me go request access to this so that I don't, rather than, oh, I'm going to go and ask my analyst to go create this. And now I have a duplicate piece of content. Somebody's wasted their time rebuilding something that did not exist before. And I just didn't know that it didn't exist because I was looking for it and didn't find it because it was hidden from me. So having discoverable content and being able to request access is a key aspect of good governance, right? And then from a data literacy perspective as a business user, I need to be able to understand, what am I looking at? So if I'm seeing a report and it's measuring sales, well, how are sales defined here? And what is the, where is it? Where does it come from? What are the key rules? Is this gross sales or net sales? Et cetera and so forth, right? So I want to be able to understand all of the information, the definition, the extended metadata, the lineage that will tell me what I'm looking at, help me gain deeper understanding of the information and make sure that I'm using that information correctly and not misusing it because I misinterpreted it from a data literacy perspective. And then I also want to make sure as a business user that I understand what the data usage constraints are around the data. What I mean by that? Well, if I'm looking at a report and it contains a restricted data, what does that mean? Am I allowed to share that only with certain parts of my organization, but not everyone else? If it's flagged as confidential, does that mean it can go to anyone in my organization or only certain groups? And what about partners? And which data sets, which reports contain public information that I can share broadly, right? So making sure that I really, I not only see that something is restricted, but I understand how that is supposed to be used in a way that will keep me in adherence with the key governance practices that are in place in the organization. Right. So with that, let's show you some examples.
Yeah, thanks, Marius. So I'm going to take over for a minute here and kind of talk about what this might look like in practice. Obviously, looking at our platform here, but generally the concepts involved with what Marius has been speaking about. So, from a business user perspective, as Marius said, a lot of business users are not really leveraging the data catalog on a daily basis. For this example, we're going to be showing some examples with Alation, but whatever your catalog might be. And so the first step really is being able to bubble up the tip of that iceberg, as Marius was talking about, from a content perspective into a centralized space that curates just the assets and the content from whatever source it might be coming from into a centralized catalog or portal that business users will come to and will engage with to look at the content that they're interested in on a daily basis. And an example is here where each of these tiles here is content that we've curated either directly or through the data catalog into this centralized space coming from, as you can see, BI tools, maybe Excel files on file stores, documents up on SharePoint, to individual metrics and data sets that might be interesting to a particular set of users. So step one is about doing that sort of curation of content for the business user and getting it into a space where again, it is more user-friendly and that they can engage with it. And during that process, as we said about before, and as Marius alluded to, through the process of curating that content and publishing it, we're going to be pulling in metadata from a number of different sources, whether it's the data catalog, as we'll see, whether it's the BI tool itself, whether it's manually or spreadsheets. Regardless of where that metadata is being captured, we want to make sure that we deliver it alongside the asset so that the user knows exactly the context behind it and is literate around it. So in this scenario, clicking on this Tableau dashboard here, we get a preview of it coming from the underlying BI tool. We probably pick up the name and description from the underlying BI tool as well. But that's augmented in this case with some fields that are coming, both from Alation in this case, that are defining that the data is confidential, that it's been through an approval process, that it's relevant to a particular line of business. We're also linked up to Collibra in our demo environment. Typically you're not going to have two data catalogs. One's hard enough. So, but again, wherever the source is, pulling that in and making sure it's delivered automatically alongside the asset itself. And then, as Marius said, through the publishing process, you may add in additional information. So, we may have a glossary that's been defined in the data catalog, or that you're defining as part of the publishing process, where we define key metrics or indicators, how they're calculated. We talked about ownership, who is responsible for these definitions and these assets that we're looking at, so that there's accountability behind them. So, as a user, whether I'm looking at a Tableau dashboard, whether I'm looking at a spreadsheet, which is what we have here, that the result is the same. I get the context behind it, I get the metadata behind it, and obviously, if it's something that I'm interested in, I can click into that particular asset and interact with it as I would usually, but with the context of all that metadata that we spoke about before. And for some users, it might make sense to be able to get back to the catalog, but rather than having to search through that and find this asset, as Mary said, it being sort of outside of my workflow, if I do want to go into the catalog and look at this, then it should be linked to it. I should be able to click through. Now we're into Alation. we're looking at this asset within Alation, and I've got other, potentially other metadata here that we haven't deemed is sort of necessary for everyone from a business perspective, and I can drill into that in more detail. But it becomes seamless, and I can see it as part of my workflow. So getting everything in this sort of single pane of glass is critical. Linking it back and making sure that we're collecting the necessary metadata automatically, and we're associating that with the relevant assets is kind of the backbone behind getting the catalog information out to the users. Using that then within a search paradigm. So, being able to come in as a user who's got access to a whole lot of categories of content and, across different tools and technologies, but to be able to come in and search across that catalog, making use of all the metadata that we've ingested to understand, what it is a particular user is looking for, being able to filter out searches by that metadata so that we can really narrow in on, again, what a user might be looking for out of the body of content that they've got access to. So leveraging all that work that you've done in the catalog, again, from a business user perspective as it relates to search, and only searching typically through that curated content is critical. So here you can see I've got a ranked set of results. Here's all the metadata that we've associated with it, and that's effectively what we're searching through to bring back this set of results. And again, though, for some users, maybe they want to go beyond that set of curated content. So, maybe we do want to search back into, in our case, the Alation catalog. So being able to do that seamlessly again as part of my workflow, I don't have to open up another application and run the same search and figure out, okay, what was in there versus not. Passing that search seamlessly into your data catalog tools so that you can leverage that search engine, look beyond it, see actually that there's multiple versions of this report out there. And this is the one that we've actually curated into the catalog. Maybe I'm looking into that sort of stuff because, I want to see what other versions are available. So again, incorporating that into the workflow is kind of critical to driving usage again of the underlying catalog tool as well. So, from a business user perspective, making sure you have this single pane of glass, making sure they're looking through the content that is only relevant to them, helps drive that engagement and get usage of the work that you're putting in the back end. The other piece that Marius has touched on a few times from a particularly business user perspective, but really everyone, is typically when you're curating something into a centralized catalog, you're going to apply and synchronize the necessary permissions and security around that. So typically when I come in as a user, I'm logged in as Sam here, they're responsible for sales and marketing. Typically my permissions are going to dictate what content I get access to, what I search through, based on my role in the organization. However, most content, again, as Marius said, unless it's super sensitive and you don't want people to know it exists, most content you want to make what we would call discoverable. So even though I don't have access to something, if I'm interested in searching for reports around procurement data, I should be able to run those searches, it look through the metadata, and it highlight any discoverable content related to procurement. So in this case, I can see this procurement dashboard. I can see the metadata associated with it, what it contains, the classification of the data, who owns it, the tags and glossary terms associated with it. Even though I don't have access to it because it's blurred out the image and the padlock on it, I can see that. But I should be able to go and request access to that particular asset now, rather than reaching out to my BI team and saying, hey, can you create me a procurement report because I didn't know one existed already. So making content discoverable beyond sort of the security and permissions that people have, again, is critical to sort of driving increased engagement with everything that you have out there that you want people looking for. back to the slides.
Thank you, Mike. So we've sort of looked a little bit at that first persona, the business user, and I think shifting gears a moment, if we think about the content publisher, this is the person who's responsible for creating the content that the business user is going to be looking at every day. They have needs from a governance perspective that you want to make sure you're addressing and filling in the gaps beyond just here's the data catalog, right? They want to be able to search for content and they want to be able to figure out like what are the certified data sets that I should use to build a new visualization. And this is particularly important if maybe it's a new data analyst, or somebody just coming into, or a data analyst moving from one group to another. Now there's a new domain. They don't know already in detail all the different tables, what they should rely on. All too often you need to talk to people and get that insights just directly, and if the right person's not available to talk to, you're out of luck, right? So being able to figure out, okay, here are the trusted data sets, certified data sets that I can build visualizations from, very important. Understanding kind of lineage, right? So I can see, well, if I'm looking at trying to do an analysis, obviously as a good analyst, I'm almost always first checking to see what already exists out there. So I might see, here's a dashboard. Well, I want to know what's the lineage for that, and what, how to, and the published data sets, and understanding, when perhaps with this dashboard contain the information I already need. Well, oh, it's coming from this particular source that I know is a trusted source, and therefore I can go ahead and use this as the basis of my analysis. Tracking usage, I think it's very important for your content. So if I'm publishing content, it ought not to be kind of a fire and forget model. Right. All too often analysts will build something, they'll give it to their users, then they'll kind of move on to the next thing down their queue, and they just don't pay any more attention to the thing that they just created. Well, that's fine in the moment, but what you really need to do is be able to tune your what you're going to be working on based on how you're doing in the past. Are the things you're creating having sustained engagement through the users? Of the 6 things you created in the last month, were 3 of them incredibly successful, where they're continuing to get engagement, and 3 of them were not? Well, you want to know which ones are which, because you can identify then maybe some patterns that will help you make sure that you're spending your time as an analyst in a way that generates the most value going forward. So getting those usage trends across all the content in your system, not just whether it's Tableau or Power BI or spreadsheets, any content you publish, understanding how that's used, very important from a governance perspective, because then you can change your behavior going forward to maximize value and learn from what's working and what's not. Right? And then the ability from a feedback cycle perspective, it's important to not only look at the numeric counts, not only, oh, how many people have actually visited this dashboard, but like, what do people think about it? Right? In an ideal world, you'd have somebody running surveys all the time and getting that information from users. But in reality, that's just not going to happen. If users, business analysts are not out there, don't have time to go out there and continuously survey their user community to find out, like, what do they really think of the content that's been created? They're too busy creating new content. So you need to have a governance platform that allows that feedback to be automatically collected and shared with the content publisher. Right, so that they can say, oh, I can tell based on what people are saying, oh, this report is missing some things, right? Or they really like the fact that how this is done, or there's some confusing usage of colors, or confusing design elements, or whatever that might be, right? So whether it's positive or negative feedback, having that feedback captured and circled back to the content publisher so they can improve that asset, and also they can improve how they build future assets, is vitally important. And then, with all of this together, the idea is that as a content publisher, I need to have a mechanism to be able to promote my content, right? So if I publish the dashboard and I look at my usage trends and I find that, oh, geez, I was expecting to get all the users in this 300 user community to look at it, and in fact, only 3 are using it, well, maybe some of them don't know about it, right? So how do I promote that content? How do I make sure that there's visibility and awareness of that happens? So Mike will show you some examples of how that works.
Yeah, so if we jump back into our catalog here, so from a data set perspective, really we're talking about the same thing, right? There's a lot of tables, in our underlying sources. We want to be able to curate certain tables into our catalog so that analysts can find them, and then we want to tie those to the lineage of the assets that we're looking at. So yeah, alongside our BI tools here, I've also got certified data sets down the bottom here that I can obviously find within search as well if I'm responsible for data sets and being able to find those. I can look through them. The metadata is again ingested either from the catalog or the underlying tool, wherever you're managing that metadata, searching down to typically the column level, so that again, as a content publisher, I can look at what has been certified, what has the necessary quality checks against it, so that if I'm going to build a particular asset, I know that this is a particular set of data that I can trust. And if I drill into those again, I may go through to the data catalog and look at the details. I may just look at the details here within the portal. What columns does this contain? How's it tagged? Who owns it? The things that we spoke about before, but also tying into that lineage that again may be coming from the underlying catalog or inferred through the tool here, where I can see this particular data set is being used in a certain workbook, certain worksheets within that workbook in Tableau in this case, beyond that in our case, so it's being used in a number of email distributions that are going out. And so I can tie this workbook back, the Tableau one that we were looking at before, back to the particular table or tables that are sourcing the data set behind it. So lineage is useful to the content creator for sure, but also potentially useful to the the user who is looking at this particular dashboard. Maybe I'm thinking about creating another dashboard around sales. I don't want to recreate things that are already there. Is this one using the data that I was planning on using? Well, if it is, then this probably has the info in that I need. So lineage and metadata around data sets is critical for the content publisher. Second thing Marius spoke about was this idea of sort of tracking usage and collecting feedback. And I think you really need both to really understand the true picture of whether a particular asset is working within the organization. So again, through the tools and through the portal, you want to be tracking what content is being used over time, what's sort of meeting its shelf life, what's going unused, get a view into the number of users and the number of views that a particular report is getting. So in this case, we're analyzing this over the last 60 days. We've got our most popular reports. We've got reports that are increasing in popularity, or data sets as well, if we're using those, decreasing, what's going unused that maybe has become obsolete. We need to get a view. Usage gives us sort of one view into the usability and the usefulness of certain content. And that should be down to a pretty detailed level. So oftentimes, similar to sort of the charts Marius showed in the slide, when you launch a particular dashboard, you will see a lot of usage if you promote that. But over time, if people don't actually find it useful, they jumped in there to look at it. So we saw a lot of views, but over time that usage drops off. Then we need to do something about it. So just the fact that this had 924 views over the last 60 days does not necessarily tell us that it's a useful dashboard, because we might see things like this, where this animation is showing us that for this report in the middle, there's a whole bunch of people who sort of came in when we promoted it, and over time never came in again. They're drifting to the outside of the circle, and there's really only a very small percentage of the users who are coming back in every day and looking at this particular content and finding it useful. So maybe we need to revisit it and understand why these other users are not utilizing it. So getting a comprehensive view of usage is important, but then understanding things like, why aren't these people looking at it? And the only way to really do that is to gather feedback from your community. So at the point of consumption, again, on any particular report or spreadsheet or whatever it might be, enabling users to give feedback, to rate it, to collect comments around the particular asset or data set, whatever it might be, so that, again, if I'm the owner of this particular report, I can understand both, what was the engagement of this asset, I can see it dropped off over time, but also, what was the feedback I was getting where it looks like we might have replaced this report with something else, therefore, maybe it is obsolete and it's something we should retire and take out of the clutter that we have out there. So usage and feedback is important. Using that then to be able to promote content is sort of critical then to driving engagement with that set of content that you want to see an increase in engagement with, because it's useful.
Thank you, Mike. So the final sort of persona that we want to talk about is data governance, right? The person is that, or the group of folks that are responsible for making sure that the organization is in compliance with all those governance policies and that you're making the most use out of the data, right? And so they want to make sure that they can certify the reports and data sets that contain trusted data. Oftentimes that might mean more nuance than just a blanket certification. Perhaps that they might designate gold, silver, bronze certification levels, or different rules associated with each of them, designate which assets qualify for each different certification levels. Basically, they want to make sure all of that, both the rules are maintained, and that they're applied in a consistent way across all the assets that are there, and then it's visible clearly to everyone in the organization when content is certified and when it's not. They also want to make sure that sensitive data has been classified properly, right? So obviously, as we talked about at the beginning, the compliance is one of the key drivers. You want to make sure PII data is not shared in the way that's inappropriate. You want to make sure any kind of restricted content, if you're a publicly held company, that restricted data is not communicated outside of the folks that are privileged and have the ability to consume that, right? Because that would be that could create all kinds of SEC violations and issues that you can get fined on. So it's even just sensitive information and confidential information. We'll make sure that doesn't get outside of the circle that it's supposed to be consumed by. So making sure all that classification takes place, and there's mechanisms to do that is very important. And then equally important, we need to make sure that the people that are consuming that content, the business users, that they understand which dashboards, which reports have sensitive data and how they should use that data, right? Because what's the use? What's the point in doing all this work from a governance perspective and tagging those tables that have PII data if in fact the people consuming that data are consuming it through a dashboard and they have no way of knowing or being flagged that, hey, this has sensitive data or this has confidential restricted information. So making sure that flows all the way to the point of consumption and that users understand how they should consume that information and what are the limitations around that consumption. Very important. And then if you're going to do that, obviously being able to review and the compliance around that. So to what extent do we have users that have gone and said, here's sensitive content, I acknowledge the fact that I understand how to use that content. Do I have a way to audit that and know so that I can guarantee that my practices are working and they're being communicated out? So let's
yeah, so let's spend a couple of minutes looking at this last persona, and then I see some questions coming in, so we'll leave some time at the end for those. So yeah, as Marius said, certification of content is critical, and again, based on the data catalog that you're using, certification may be happening as a workflow within the underlying catalog if it supports it potentially for certain content. And obviously, if you're doing that, maybe you have an approval process or workflow, or maybe the tool supports an actual certification flag. If that happens, obviously we want to curate that automatically into the catalog for users. So in our catalog here, anything that has a sort of stamp of approval on it at a certain level is because that has been certified by a particular user on a particular date. And so again, this may be synchronized up from your underlying catalog. or it may be something that happens if the curation process is happening directly within the catalog. So often what we'll see is that we want to curate a set of content that exists in the organization, but we want to push that through a certain sort of workflow process that ensures, the certain stakeholders who are responsible for a particular asset have sort of done the checks and balances, have maybe added in any additional manual metadata, have done the data quality checks. We want to push a particular asset, that has been deemed something that we want to curate through stages of responsibility before it ultimately gets published and certified. And so the final result being that stamp of approval with, again, the accountability of who's done it. So whether, again, it be a data set, a dashboard, or a report, curating the tip of the iceberg, but then certifying that content so users know they can trust it is critical, so that when they come in and they're browsing and searching through it, they've got the necessary context around that certification. We also spoke about, sort of the terms of service, if you like, around a particular asset. So making sure business users understand sort of the sensitivity of information and the classification of information. So in this case, we're simply publishing a spreadsheet to our end users, and we're making that available within the catalog. So cash flow statement in this case, I've got the necessary metadata that we spoke about before. But in this case, we've also made an announcement around this where we're informing the user that it does contain sensitive information. We've recognized that, and that there's actually usage policies around it, which users are responsible for actually going in and accepting that they've read those and that they understand them. And so, delivering those policies alongside the asset directly to the user is critical in getting that information out there, but then tracking that as well. So, understanding who has accepted the policies and who hasn't, ensures that we can keep track of that. We can alert around this to say, okay, out of all the people who have access to that particular asset, who are the ones who are yet to accept the policies, so that we can reach out to them and make sure that they understand them. So again, if you're going to go through the effort of tagging content, setting sensitive information, classifying it, making sure the end users understand how they should be using it, and then understanding that they know how they should be using it is critical to getting that information out there. So hopefully that's given you some ideas around how you might get some better traction with some of the governance and catalog efforts that you're putting in place. But with that, I guess, Shannon, maybe I'll hand it back to you to start fielding some of these questions that are coming in.
Thank you both so much for this. Another great presentation, great content, a lot of questions coming in. Just to answer the most commonly asked questions, just a reminder, I will be sending a follow-up email to all registrants by end of day Thursday for this webinar with links to the slides, links to the recording, and anything else requested. So diving in here is the, how do you recommend we get the data owners or stewards to classify all the content if we did the cloud migration before having a data catalog?
So how I see. Sorry. Maybe how do you recommend we get the data owners or stewards classify all the content if we did first the migration? So well, so it's obviously a challenge to get people to do classification and do the work of capturing the information. So the key aspect of it is to be able to see, if you're going to create this kind of governed environment where you're promoting the things that are going to be searchable into the space, then the fact that the classification has to take place needs to be part of the fact of promoting it to be governed, right? So you're saying, okay, you've done all this work to create your content. Now get the maximum amount of usage out of it, promote it in the environment. To do that, you need to add the classification information. And the idea is that you want to try to be really smart and make that process as lightweight as possible. So to the extent possible, obviously, data governance tools identify certain auto-classify content. And then if the things that you do want to manual classify, be very mindful about what those things are and pick the minimum highest value things like PII flag, data classification, things that are vitally important, make it easy for them. So that kind of workflow that Mike showed is a great way to be able to do that, where really with a click or two in publishing the asset, they can simply do that, right? And then you can, by virtue of ownership, you can use the feedback loop where you can notify people, hey, there's all these assets you have for publishing that have not been acted upon. Go in there, and then in a few minutes they can apply those classifications. So should we pick another question, I guess? Oh,
Yeah.
Sharon.
Sorry. So can you clarify if Metric Insights is a standalone data catalog or if it works in tandem with a data catalog tool to support typical end user workflow?
So we are not a classic standard data catalog, in that we are a BI portal solution that acts as a governance platform, right? This is the way we think of ourselves. So think about the fact that you want to bring all of your assets together in one governed environment. But the classic sort of data catalog type functions like auto classification of information, discoverability, PI data, all those things, you're better suited doing all that in a classic data catalog solution. And then we integrate with all of the existing data catalog solutions out there so that you can leverage that and bring that metadata into Metric Insights together with other metadata that maybe is not in the catalogs, like things that people maintain in spreadsheets, etc. And then present that all to the user when they're consuming that dashboard, that report, or that Excel spreadsheet.
Perfect. So how do you change the culture on keeping even metadata hidden, especially from a federal government background?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you've got regulatory issues in place, or if you're a federal government situation, you're bound by those. If metadata is, it has to be for some reason confidential, or I know with the government work, there's oftentimes various classifications, very strict rules about even knowing about assets. But even within that, if you were to say, okay, maybe I can't let everyone know, but oftentimes there's a larger population within a particular knowledge work or classification or group that could be allowed to discover content that particular set of content that don't necessarily know about it because they're not been given direct access, right? So I think the way to do that is not to have it be it's more of a scalpel approach than a hammer. You're not going to change culture of a government organization, obviously, but you can look and say, is there not of the people that are able to, through our current governance constraints, are able to access this content, what percentage of them are actually assigned, and can we be smart about making the content discoverable to the rest of them by through implementing sort of group level permissions, discoverability at a group level.
I love it. So how do you define a governed space? Who's responsible for maintaining it?
That's that one too. So the governed space, the idea of a governed space is that everything that we've shown you here, discoverability, the ability to see metadata, ability to consume only the good stuff, getting that top 10% of the content rather than the entire iceberg. That's what a governed space is about. It's about separating the wheat from the chaff, right? And making sure that you're creating an experience that should be much more for end users, more like visiting a museum than like just wandering around through the overgrown forest, right? So there, if you think about a museum, right, you're walking around and you're seeing like this little placard next to every painting. It explains what's there. Paintings are arranged together thematically in a way that's coherent, that guides in your journey. So a governed space creates that kind of experience, while at the same time ensuring that you're in compliance with all of your key regulatory constraints around classification of data and so on and so forth. Right. So that's it. Now, as far as who's responsible for maintaining it, there are different models here. So in some cases, you can go with a centralized model. Typically, this is more what happens in a smaller organization, but you might have one central team that manages the entire space. Obviously, for large enterprises, that's not possible, right? There's just too many assets and too many groups. And so in that situation, you have a kind of a hub and spoke model where you have a center of excellence that's responsible for establishing the standards or the guardrails, if you like, for the governed space. You know, they say, here's the category structure, here's where content's going to live, here's the basic rules, here's what certification means, here's the high-level workflows. And then the responsibility for populating the content, it goes out to the spokes, the particular business units that are content creators that are building that content. And that's what we typically see in large scale enterprises where you're talking about thousands or tens of thousands of users.
I think maybe it ties into that next question, Shannon. What do we mean by a single pane of glass? I mean, you know, when we talk about this governed space, this portal, you know, oftentimes business users in an organization have access to reporting in many different tools, everything from a spreadsheet to on SharePoint to a dashboard in a BI tool to a report in Salesforce to a data science model sitting out there somewhere. And we're just talking about having a single place to go and search and find that content, not having to go to many different tools to access it and look at it. So yeah, again, a single governed, probably mixing metaphors, but a single governed space, you know, a single pane of glass, you know, one place to manage everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key distinction there is, you know, you could put a whole bunch of links together someplace and it's all one place, right? But if it's governed, it really implies this much more the curated experience, right? That's the key thing.
Oh, well, Marius and Mike, thank you so much. There's so many great questions coming in, but we'll make sure and get those over to you. And thanks to all of our attendees for being so engaged in everything we do. But that does bring us to the top of the hour. Again, just a reminder, I will send a follow-up email to all registrants by end of day Thursday with links to the slides, recording, and additional information. Mike and Marius, thank you so much. As always, another great presentation. And thanks to Metric Insights for bringing today's webinar. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
all.